Today we're going to learn how to make stripes on our simple round knitting loom hat pattern. If you've never made a hat on these before, go check my last video out and it shows you the basics of how to do the stitches and how to fold the brim and all of that sort of thing. Today we're going to be using Loops and Threads Charisma yarn. I've got one here with a ball band on it. This is the old ball band, they're white now. But you can see it's a number 5 bulky. It ridiculously asks for a smaller hook than knitting needle. You're looking for something that uses a 9mm needle or 10 or even 11. I'm not sure what the blanket calls for. Anyway, this is what we're using today. It's a bit thin for this loom, but it works nicely anyway. But I'm using scraps. So I've got 2 colors here. I've got more of the blue than the white, although I do have several balls of each of these. If you're using up scraps, I highly recommend you start by using the one you have the most of, just in case. So I'm going to use this blue, and I am going to do, I'm going to wrap the pegs twice and then lift the bottom loop over the top. So pause here while you do that so you can catch up. So I've done my first 2 rounds. I wrapped around twice, I lifted the bottom over the top, and now we have the start of our hat. You see inside there. Now, a little trick here, if you don't have a ton of your second color, you might want to do more rounds of your first one that you have lots of. This part of the hat will be inside once we fold up the brim, so no one will see it. So we're going to start by doing horizontal stripes, because they're the easiest ones to do. Now, in the last video, you saw that I had made marks on my loom with Sharpie. Where's this one? There it is. I use those for color work, including this. So I'm going to go to one of these marks. It doesn't matter which one, as long as I don't start in the same place. The reason for this is it's easier to weave in the ends if you start somewhere else. So I'm going to start on my halfway mark, which is directly across from my pin. I do it this way, there you go. But it doesn't really matter. You're going to put your second color inside the loom. I'm just going to hold it with this finger here. And I'm going to wrap around the first peg after this line. So that's this one. Okay. So I'm coming from the back and around the front to the back again. And I'm going to hold on to the yarn again with my non-dominant hand. Grab my hook tool and lift the bottom over the top. That will hold that stitch there so you can let go now. And we're just going to wrap our way around the loom again. Pause here till you catch up. All right, so I've wrapped all the way around. Here's the first stitch. I've just wrapped this one. I'm going to lift this last one, the bottom loop, over the top to hold the working yarn. And now we can go around and lift the bottom loop over the top all the way around. Pause here until you catch up. When you get around to where you started, you're going to find that these 2 loops are going to be a little loose, especially this last one. So just be careful and give the end a little bit of a tug. Don't pull it too tightly, just to keep it in place. Do the same one there and continue on. All right, so I finished lifting the bottom loop over the top. I've got my starting ends in the middle here, my working ends on the outside. You can see we've got white loops on our loom now. Okay, so since we did white last, we're going to do blue. We're going to go over to our working yarn. We got the peg there to show us where we started. Go around that first peg there and work your way around. Now once you get across to the other side, here I'm at my mark here, you've got this yarn here. Now, if you're only doing 1x1 striping, you can just keep going. If you're doing 2x2 striping, you might want to lift this to the front for one of the stripes, just so it sort of weaves through the stitches. I'll show you that on the next round, but for this one, we're just going to keep going. 1x1 striping is by far the easiest. And it's a great way to use up scraps because if you end up, say I had to bring in another ball of the white, I wouldn't have to worry about it being the same dye lot because it's not going to be right next to the other white. There'll be a round of blue in the way. All right, so just lift the bottom loop over the top all the way around. Pause here and take a catch up. Okay, so that's all you have to do 1x1 stripes. It's hard to see in the fabric here, but see, I've got blue and then white and then blue is on the peg at the moment. It looks great. I'm going to show you how to do 2x2, or to do 2 rounds of the same color before switching back. So I'm going to continue with the blue. You're going to wrap around until you get to where your second color is joined on, so to my halfway mark. Oh, there we are. So here's the white yarn that's in the back. I'm going to move it where the mark is, so between the first stitch of that round and the last stitch. I'm going to move it to the front and then keep going. So to review, if you're just doing 1x1, just leave it in the back. If you're doing 2 rounds of the color, leave it in the back for the first one and then bring it to the front for the second. And if you're doing 3 rounds, do back, then front, then back, that sort of thing. If you're doing more than 3 rounds, just cut the yarn. Leaving an ends isn't that big of a deal, especially if you do it as you go. So I'm just going to work around the loom here, moving the working yarn out of the way. Oh, I keep hitting my stand here. Moving the working yarn out of the way as needed. Okay, pause here until you catch up. All right, I'm going back to my white now. Okay, so onto the other side of the loom. At this point, make sure your working yarns aren't tangled. And we're going to go just around the first stitch here, all the way around. And that's it. You just keep going back and forth between them as you wish. So here I'm leaving the blue in the background, in the back of the stitches before continuing on. The next time I go around with the white, I'm going to move that blue to the front for my 2x2 striping. All right, work off all your stitches and pause here until you catch up. Okay, so just one more time, I'm going to show you how, if you're doing 2x2 rows, this is the second row of white I'm doing. I'm going to go around until I meet up to where the blue starts, which is at the peg. Okay, now I'm going to move the blue working yarn between that last stitch and the first one to the front, and then I'm going to keep going. And then we work the stitches off. So what I want you to do is now keep working like this, either in your 1x1 color or your 2x2 color, until you've got your brim done. When you get to the top though, and you think your brim is long enough, finish with white. Okay, so if you're doing 1x1, just finish with a round of white. If you're doing 2x2, you finish with 2 rounds of white. Okay, and the entire reason is because we started with the blue and we're going to fold it up. So now the blue is going to be on top of that white. If we had finished with blue, we'd end up with blue on top of blue, and that might be too big of a blue stripe. You'll see it more once you catch up. So work to finish your brim, and we'll catch up to how to fold it up and stuff. So pause here until you've caught up. All right, so I've got my brim finished here. You can see we have a bit of a jog, but it's not super obvious, especially with the 2x2. In the finished hat, no one will notice. Okay, while I was making this, I measured and I'd reached 6 inches when I was still doing blue. So I finished the blue and I did 2 more rounds of the white. I like to default on the side of having too long of a brim because I live in Canada and it's cold here. So too big of a brim's not as much of a problem as too small of a brim. All right, I'm going to zoom in while I weave in the ends. All right, so I've got my loom upside down and I've got the end of it here. with the, got the peg facing me, so I've got the end of the blue. Just gonna put that on my needle. It's already moving to the back. If yours isn't, go through there. And we're gonna go under from the back here and then pass this post here to the back to add in our missing loop. Although, and now we're gonna weave it in. Just gonna go up this row of stitches. You can see I left my one round of white stripe in there. It'll be inside the brim, no one will notice. Okay, this yarn is slipperier than the one I used in the first loom knitting video, so I am actually going to go in 3 directions this time, just in case. All right, let's cut that off. All right, and since we're doing 2 colors, I'm going to turn the loom around and weave in the white end. This one is pretty straightforward. Let's get it on our needle here. Okay, we're on the back. We don't have to do anything particularly special here because it's not the end we're going to be moving up for to make the brim. But there is this hole, and it has to do with how we join the yarn on. So what I'm going to do is the first bump I'm going to go under is this blue one across, just to close up that hole. Okay, now these stitches will be harder to see because this is where we moved our yarn. But the bumps are still there, if I can get under. Okay, so blue, blue, white, white. And again, you don't want to pull this first one too tightly, you just want it to match the gauge that your hat has already. And then go ahead and keep weaving in. Okay, and that's the end of that. Now it's time to fold up our brim. So making sure that both of our working ends are on the outside. We're using blue here. I'm going to start back through the round from where my starting yarn was. So say this peg. We're going to follow it down to the loop at the bottom and lift it up through the middle onto that peg. And then it's just lift the next loop onto the pegs as you get to them. Now you're watching for where you catch up to your second color, which for me is here. Oops. I'm going to move the working yarn to the outside so it doesn't get trapped inside this brim. Keep going. We're watching for where we started the first color. Oh, we're coming to the peg. Yeah, I thought that was weird. I'll just put that over. Bring the working yarn to the front. And there we have it. We're just going to work the bottom loop over the top. Like that, all the way around. Pause here until you catch up. All right, so I've got my brim folded up, all the stitches are worked off. And remember we ended with 2 rounds of the second color, the white in my case. But we're left with a round of blue because we folded up the brim. So what I'm going to do is 1 round of the blue to make that a total of 2. Now that first round here that we folded up in the finished hat is going to look shorter than your other rounds. So you might decide that doing another round of blue after this one makes sense for you. I would recommend to start with, you just do this one round of blue and then continue with your striping pattern. As you get more advanced and more familiar with how things look, especially with the yarn that you're using, you can make a better decision, a more informed decision. Until then, just do this. All right, so I'm going to count that as 2 rounds of blue, the round that we wrapped and the round that got folded up with the brim. That's what it looks like inside. All right, so just keep going with your 2x2 or 1x1 color changes. If you were doing 1x1 this entire time, I would not have done blue here, I would have done white. So I started with the blue, folding it up, that became the blue round, so I would have gone on with white. Okay, so keep going until the hat's as deep as you want, and I'll show you how to finish off. So pause here until you've gotten to that point. Just popping in here briefly, as I was working the top part of my hat, I'm about 3 inches up, I ran out of white. I went as far as I thought I could go and still get 2 rounds, and then I just cut the yarn. And I've done 2 more rows of blue, and now I'm going to add on this one. Now, if I was positive that my next ball of yarn was the same dye lot, I would have kept going with the white until I was just about out, until I had about, well, that's a really long end, but until I had about 6 inches left, I would have stopped, locked the stitch in by lifting the loop over, and then started the new one right there. But I don't know that this is the same dye lot, so I am going to join this yarn on. I'm not going to start across from the pin like I did originally. I'm already going to have to weave this end in here, so I'm going to pick one of my 2 tick marks, which are on the quarters, and I'm just going to join it on there. That'll give me more real estate to weave in this end and make life easier for me all around. So I'm just going to have the working yarn, or have the starting yarn inside the hat and go from back to front and around the peg, and I'm going to do this, lift the loop over to lock it into place. Now I can go ahead and wrap my loops and continue as normal. All right, I've got the top of my hat as long as I'd like it to go. I've only got 1 round of white as opposed to 2 like our striping pattern is, but I do think I'm going to stop here. And the reason why I'm comfortable with that, despite it not being in the style of the rest of the hat, is that this is going to bunch up and there's going to be like a white circle on the top, and I think if there were 2 rounds it would look a little weird. So also I went a little too far. It's a little bigger than 6 inches, so I don't want to keep going. I am going to weave in the ends that I have in the middle here. So I've got the 2 white ones from when I changed balls, and I've got my blue one that I don't need anymore. I think first though, just to make things easier, I am going to cut this. This is going to be the drawstring close. So across the loom and then a little extra, just so that we don't have to be attached to that ball. So I'll move that to the outside. I'm going to put this inside out to make the ends easier to weave in, and we'll move the camera in. Okay. Here's one of our ends. We'll just thread it onto our needle. And this all looks pretty nice here. What I'm going to do is the first place I'm going to go under is this bump here, just so we don't get any holes opening up there. And then we'll just weave in as normal. Ooh, if we can. There we go. Making sure you don't pull it too tightly. You don't want to have weird gathers in your hat if you can avoid them. Although this close to the top you might not notice. find our other white one. I'll make sure it's the one on the inside and not the one we need for later. Just thread that up there. Now this one, we do have a little bit of a hole there. So I am going to go down through this bump first and then weave in as normal. That hole is nicely closed up. That just leaves the blue one, which is over here. Now you can see I forgot to move my yarn to the front when I did the second round of white a couple of times. So you can see these big strands here. That's what we're trying to avoid. You don't see them in the other places. If you leave these strands, you got to make sure that they're basically the exact right tension. So I don't recommend forgetting to do that. Let's this up. We're going to go across to here. Let's see, can you see this hole here? I'm going to go across to this one just to help snug that up a little bit, although because of the way that's stranded, it's not going to be great. Again, this is close enough to the top of the hat that it hopefully won't matter. I don't think anybody will complain. I could kick myself, that's all. And I'll just weave this in a couple more directions, just really tack it down. Make sure it's not too snug, and cut off the rest there. All right, we are ready to bind off. Put that back down through there. So we've got our yarn here that we've cut off. I've got marks on my loom where I ended, but you can see it's coming out of the loop around this peg. So we want to start on this peg. I'm going to bring the yarn to the front and just lay it over the front of the peg. You might want to hold it so it's a little more taut. You lift the bottom over the top, and then you're going to pull that loop all the way out. And we go over the next one and do the same. And just keep doing that. You can see it's coming off the loom. This is exactly the same as when we did the one color hat. Do that all the way across. Pause here till you catch up. All right, so my hat is off of the loom. There it is there. Let's move that aside. And I'll show you, I've got the hole in the top here. This yarn is so much smoother than what I used in the first video that I didn't have to keep pulling on it. But you'll see the difference soon. I'm going to pop that end into the middle, and then I'm going to turn it inside out. Let's thread our needle here. Okay, so just zoop. This is the Loops and Threads Charisma, and look at that, it snaps, it just tugs right up. Now that blue is there from the second to last round, don't worry about it. All right, so I'm going to go across like that, and then put my needle under these loops at the top until I'm about 1/4 of the way around, and pull that tight. Okay, now I'm going to go straight across again, but I'm going to just tie a knot here. So we'll go through, pull it tight. There we go. Now I just have to leave this end in. Okay, we're just going to go under the bumps. I like to go a ways down just to get away from the clumped up mess at the top. Oh, and we've run into where we've woven in before, so that's as far as I'm going to go. And I'm going to go nope, I'm going to go this way, away from the end of the other one. Alright, to make sure it's not too snug. And we are done. There we go. So you see on the top there, I kind of wish I'd done that second round of white just so that I could avoid this. But it's not the end of the world. Most people, you don't see the top of their hats. So here's our finished hat with a 2x2 color change. You can see here, this is the row that one of the rounds was the first round that we folded up for the brim, and you can see how this blue stripe is skinnier than the others. You might want to do another round of blue there. It's up to you. It's not really something that you can fix, so if it really bothers you, I recommend not changing colors in this area. It can look very nice if you do it that way, so it is an option. Thanks for watching.